In the scorched highlands of northern Ethiopia, where the earth had baked into something closer to concrete than soil, thousands of villagers showed up for work. They didn't carry saplings, they carried pickaxes, shovels, and crowbars. And for months, under the skeptical gaze of government officials and the open laughter of neighboring villages, these workers did something that looked completely insane. They dug holes, millions of them. They excavated over 20,000 deep trenches. They stacked 38,000 earthen walls. They assembled 439 kilometers of stone barriers, roughly the distance from London to Paris, all by hand. To anyone watching, this wasn't reforestation. This was an open-air mining operation. This was preparation for trench warfare. The local engineers had seen tree planting campaigns come and go for decades. International organizations would arrive with nursery seedlings, plant them in neat rows, take photos for their annual reports, and leave. Within months, 90% of those trees would be dead. The soil was too hard. The rain ran off like water on glass. The goats ate whatever survived, plant and pray and fail. So when these villagers started hacking trenches into rock-hard ground instead of planting trees, the skepticism was predictable. Why dig graves for water that never comes? Why move millions of tons of rock in a landscape where nothing grows? But the people digging those holes knew something the engineers had missed. They knew the forest wasn't actually dead. It was hiding underground. And they knew that before they could bring it back, they had to plant something else entirely. They had to plant the rain first. 7 years later, satellite images show a sharp green line cutting across the Ethiopian highlands. On one side, the same dusty brown wasteland. On the other, 23,000 hectares of recovering forest with a 90% survival rate. To understand why this worked, you first have to understand why everything else failed. Picture the geography. To the east lies the Danakil Depression, one of the hottest places on Earth, a geological pit where temperatures regularly hit 50 degrees Celsius. To the west lie the Tigray Highlands, a region that has supported farming for 3,000 years. The Desaa forest sat between them like a wall. This was not just a forest, it was a cloud catcher. During the dry season, moisture-laden air drifts up from the Rift Valley. A healthy forest canopy acts like a comb, pulling that moisture out of the air. The water drips to the soil, feeds underground springs, and flows out to farms in the valleys below. For centuries, the system worked. Then the forest started disappearing. By the early 21st century, 74% of the Desaa forest had been cut down. Charcoal production, overgrazing, expanding farmland, the usual reasons. But the consequences were anything but usual. When you remove forest cover from a slope, you do not just lose trees, you break the water cycle itself. Rain hits bare ground. Without roots to hold it, without leaf litter to slow it down, the water starts moving. It picks up speed going downhill. That speed gives it energy, and that energy starts stripping away topsoil, the thin layer that took thousands of years to form. Across Ethiopia, this process was washing away 1.5 billion tons of topsoil every year. But the damage went deeper. When soil loses its organic matter, when it gets pounded by livestock hooves and baked by the sun, it changes. It compacts. It seals. Rain hits the surface and beads up like water on a waxed car. The ground cannot drink anymore. The water table dropped. Springs went dry. Wells came up empty. The forest that used to comb moisture from the air was gone, so the clouds just blew over bare rock without leaving anything behind. This is what they call a green drought. The rain still falls, but the land cannot access any of it. The sponge is broken. In this environment, planting a tree is pointless. You are not fighting drought. You are fighting physics. The soil cannot hold water long enough for roots to find it. The sun bakes out whatever moisture remains, and even if a seedling survives the first dry season, the goats will eat it to a nub. The land was not missing trees, it was missing the ability to grow them. The breakthrough came when the project leaders stopped thinking like foresters and started thinking like engineers. The problem was not biological, It was mechanical. Water was hitting the ground and running away. The solution had to stop that from happening. Not with seeds, with physics. They called it planting the rain. The first intervention was the trenches. Over 20,000 of them, each about 3 to 4 meters long and a meter deep. These were not irrigation channels. They were traps. When water flows down a slope, it accelerates. It picks up energy. That energy tears soil apart. The trenches work like brakes. When runoff hits a trench, its velocity drops to zero. The energy that would scour the hillside dissipates instantly. But stopping the water is only half the job. The other half is making it go down instead of sideways. Once water is trapped in a trench, gravity takes over. Instead of flowing horizontally off the land, the water sinks vertically. It seeps through soil layers, recharging the earth above the water table, eventually reaching deep underground reserves that feed the springs. Those trenches alone capture an estimated 1.7 million cubic meters of rainwater every year. Water that used to flash off the hillside in minutes is now held in the ground for months. But the trenches were just the start. The project also dug 3.8 million microbasins, small pits scattered across the hillsides like dimples on a golf ball. These turned the smooth shedding surface into something with texture. Think of the difference between a flat plate and a waffle. The flat plate lets syrup run off. The waffle holds it in the pockets. Each pit acts as a tiny catchment. Even a few millimeters of rainfall, which would evaporate on flat ground, collects at the bottom. The pits also trap wind-blown leaves and twigs, which decompose into compost right where a seedling's roots will eventually be. Then came the stone walls. There were 439 kilometers of them, built along the precise curves of the hills. These walls do two things. First, they break long slopes into shorter segments. A long slope lets water build speed. Short segments keep it slow. When water overtops one wall, it immediately hits the next, creating a cascade of absorption instead of a flood of destruction. Second, the stones provide shade. They block the sun from the soil behind them, reducing surface temperatures and slowing evaporation. In a region where the sun can kill a seedling in hours, that shade means survival. Instead of planting millions of nursery seedlings, they looked for what was already there. The forest wasn't dead. It was hiding. In Ethiopia's dry highlands, trees like the African olive and juniper have evolved a survival trick. When they're repeatedly grazed or cut, they don't die. They retreat underground. The root systems survive, massive networks that have spent decades mining deep earth for water. Above ground, you see a scraggly stump. Below ground, a fully charged biological battery. The project trained villagers to find these hidden stumps. When they found one, they didn't plant next to it. They pruned it. They cut away the chaotic bushy growth and left one or two dominant stems. This channeled all that stored root energy into rapid upward growth. These trees didn't need to establish roots. They already had roots. They shot upward 10 times faster than any nursery seedling could. But none of this would work if the goats kept eating everything. The final piece was the simplest and the hardest. The project convinced communities to ban grazing in the restoration areas. This was not a fence. It was a social agreement, village laws enforced by the people who lived there. They created zones where livestock were completely prohibited. To make it work, they had to replace what the farmers were losing. They introduced a cut-and-carry system. Farmers harvested grass from the recovering land and carried it to sheep in stalls. The sheep did not walk miles for food, so they gained weight faster. Farmers made more money from healthier animals than they ever did from free-range grazing. They also handed out fuel-efficient cook stoves that use half the wood. This cut pressure on remaining trees and freed up hours of labor for women who used to spend their days gathering fuel. Conservation became more profitable than destruction. For the first few years, the landscape looked worse, not better. Trenches cut across slopes like scars. Stone walls broke the hills into terraced segments. The ground was pocked with millions of small holes. No green in sight, just brown earth, gray stone, and dust. This was what outsiders saw. This was why they laughed. But underground, the water was working. The trenches filled after rains and held water for days instead of minutes. That water seeped into soil that had not been wet in years. The pruned stumps started pushing up shoots, tentative at first, then stronger. By year 3, the first trees survived the dry season. The system had turned on. Trees meant shade. Shade lowered soil temperature. Lower temperature meant less evaporation. Less evaporation meant more moisture. More moisture meant more trees. The feedback loop kicked in. As trees grew, their roots partnered with fungi in the soil. These fungi produce a sticky substance that binds soil particles into stable clumps, creating tiny air pockets that let the ground hold water like a sponge. The trenches caught the rain. The trees fed the fungi. The fungi made the glue. The glue turned soil into a sponge that held water for the trees. Each piece reinforced every other piece. By year 5, the change showed up on satellite images. A sharp line between project area and wasteland, green inside, brown outside. On the ground, it was even more dramatic. Streams that used to run chocolate brown with mud now ran clear. The sediment was staying on the hills. Those streams kept flowing longer after rain stopped, fed by slow-releasing underground water. Springs that had been dry for a generation started flowing again. The true test came during the Tigray War from 2020 to 2022. Conflict engulfed the region. International aid collapsed. Most projects shut down. Desa restoration kept going. Because the knowledge belonged to local communities, the village laws and the restoration committees, the work continued even when the region was cut off from the world. The nurseries were protected by the villagers themselves. The project became a lifeline, providing work and food security in the middle of a humanitarian crisis. Numbers tell the rest. 23,000 hectares under restoration management, an area larger than Paris. 22.5 million trees planted or regenerated. 3.8 million microbasins dug by hand. 439 kilometers of stone walls. Seedling survival rate 90%, in a region where 50% counts as success. Carbon captured, nearly 1.85 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent to taking 430,000 cars off the road for a year. Plant species up 20%, birds and pollinators returning. The cloud forest function is coming back. The rougher texture of the canopy pulls moisture from the air, cooling the local climate and reducing heat stress on crops in the valley below. Compare this to Turkey in 2019, when the government planted 11 million trees in a single day for the cameras. Up to 90% died within months. Wrong season, no water preparation, no long-term care. Desa planted rain before it planted trees. It accepted years of ugly work, trenching, terracing, stone stacking before any green appeared. The lesson here isn't complicated. Sometimes the most advanced technology is just gravity and patience. Sometimes fixing a landscape means fighting physics before you can work with biology. Sometimes you have to dig holes in rock before anything can grow. The people of Tigray didn't save their forest by planting trees. They saved it by engineering the ground to catch rain, removing the goats that ate every seedling, and finding the hidden forest waiting underground. They broke the earth to save it.